Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Sunday for Sunday, August 8th, 2021. We've got another great show for you this week. I'll be joined by members of the media, academia, and financial services as we analyze all the news and information in so many different topics. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday. Well, let's kick things off with a look at personal finance. Joining us on the line, she is a personal finance reporter for The Motley Fool. They call her a fool. I don't think she's a fool, but she's a fool, a motley fool. We're talking about Mari Backman. Mari, so great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Of course. Thanks for having me. And, I'll tell you, Jeff, that when we're called fools in that context, it's a positive thing. So
Absolutely.
As long as you're calling me a fool with a capital F, I'm good.
Absolutely. Well, I would never presume to call you anything but positive. You make a positive impact on all the readers that you touch, and also through our podcast. So we appreciate you coming on. Let's talk, Mari, about. I know you wanted to talk about this Delta variant and the uncertainty and what that means for the economic and personal finance impact to so many of us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, nobody wants to talk about the Delta variant, but I think we have to address the elephant in the room here. So, I know that about a month or so ago, Jeff, you and I were talking about how, things are finally better with regard to the pandemic. So be careful, people. Don't go out and spend all your money. Let's rein that in, right? But now we're sort of in this. I guess we've taken this step backward because this variant has taken over, and so cases are surging once again, and that's unfortunately creating not only a lot of health concerns but a lot of economic uncertainty. Now, I'll tell you, Jeff, that over the last few weeks, new jobless claims have sort of flip-flopped, right? So we had a few weeks where they came in, at over 400,000, and not that 400,000 is like the be-all or end-all, but it's sort of like this benchmark that a lot of analysts have been using. Will claims come in at over 4 or under 4? So, we've flip-flopped. This week they came in actually at a little bit under 400,000, so that was good. But all told, we are still seeing a lot of new unemployment claims, and this is at a time where we still have not recovered all of the jobs that were lost during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Now we have this Delta variant coming in, and we've already seen the CDC reverse course on mask wearing. They're now saying that even vaccinated people should basically be masking up in indoor spaces when they're out in public. We're already seeing some cities impose different requirements. New York is now saying you're not going to be able to enter a theater or a restaurant if you can't show proof of a vaccine. LA has certain mandates, in place, and I think, Jeff, that if things take a turn for the worse, with regard to the outbreak itself, I think we're going to see more big cities. Maybe it'll happen at the city level, maybe it'll happen at the statewide level, but I think especially we're going to see more big cities imposing certain restrictions. And so then that begs the question, are we going to get back to the lockdown situation that we were in early on in the pandemic? I think we all want to hope not, right?
Absolutely.
But at the same time, could I see a scenario where, restaurants have to impose capacity limits again? Could I see a situation where businesses have to limit the number of, customers who come in at a time? I could see that happening, even if temporarily, while we really try to battle out this Delta variant and maybe try to encourage more folks to get out and get vaccinated. So, all of that could easily lead to, higher levels of unemployment. It could prevent more people from getting back into the labor force. And this is all coming at a time when boosted jobless benefits are going to be running out soon. Right now, people on unemployment are getting an extra $300 a week in roughly half of U.S. states, because a lot of states have pulled that boost, but a lot of states are still participating in that program, and that's helping a lot of jobless people really stay afloat at a time like this. Well, that's supposed to expire in early September, and so far there's no talk of extending it. So that's just not such a great situation, but because what we have going on here is basically we have the makings, right, of higher unemployment numbers to start coming in at the exact time where the unemployed have, less of a financial lifeline available to them. So that's a little concerning to me.
Yeah, for obvious reasons. Mari, let me ask you about the eviction moratorium. Last week we're talking to Jacob Passy over at MarketWatch about that was going to be the moratorium was going to be ended. And then Saturday comes and goes because it was like the ends on the 31st, and then Sunday the 1st is when it officially was ended, I guess. And then now we see the eviction moratorium put back into place. That has a positive impact, I would think, on renters. Landlords, on the other hand, probably crying foul because they're probably looking for payment.
Exactly. Well, so the new eviction moratorium, it's not quite as all-encompassing as the last one, but it's going to help out most people because basically it's applicable in areas with, with high transmission or substantial transmission of COVID, which is, a lot of the country right now. And so, basically it is going to buy a lot of renters a reprieve. Landlords, on the other hand, are the ones who are going to get the short end of the stick. And the thing is, a lot of people, they don't have a lot of sympathy for landlords. That they think, oh well, landlords they have these deep pockets. They're okay. But the reality is, a large chunk of landlords are not these huge conglomerates. They're not these huge property management companies. They're just everyday people like you and me, who own a couple of income properties, and they're full-time landlords. They're the landlord. They're the super. They're the people who are also depositing the rent checks, and that's just their job. And these are people who have, some of whom really have not collected much or any money, like over the last 18 months. So it is a problem because, while obviously, the government needed to step in and do something to prevent this huge wave of evictions, but, at the same time, landlords weren't thrown that much of a bone. Landlords, like regular homeowners, could, put property mortgages for their properties into forbearance, which gives them a pause on making those payments. But, that doesn't necessarily give them money that they can use to eat or, pay other bills. So obviously a lot of landlords are going to be pretty unhappy about this turn of events. There is, a big pool of rental assistance funds out there. There's $45 billion in rental assistance.
Wow.
That, that's supposed to actually be going into landlords' pockets. So when you apply for rental assistance, conceivably you can arrange it, and you should, and states are arranging it so that landlords can receive that money. Some landlords can even apply for rental assistance on the part of their tenants who are behind on rent. So there are ways for landlords to be made whole in this situation. The problem, though, is that, because all this money is being distributed at the state level, the rollout's been really slow, Jeff. A lot of states didn't even get their application portals up and running until a couple of months ago. And I read earlier this week that I think roughly $3 billion in rental assistance funds has been given out. That's not a lot when we consider that there's $45 billion available. I think in the coming weeks and months, more of that money is going to start going out. But again, right now, that's another one of these like uncertain situations where right now and the next couple of months there might be, kind of an unfortunate crunch for a lot of people.
Mari, last question. Emergency savings. We learned that a lot of people did not have emergency savings going into this pandemic. And we also learned that people maybe pocketed. There's pent-up demand or pent-up money people hadn't been spending. I would anticipate, but I want to get your confirmation or your point of view, that should we see closures or more restrictions, some people might actually not spend the money. Maybe they'll save it. Maybe they'll have learned the lesson through that we some of us did during the pandemic, the first iteration of the pandemic.
That's certainly a positive way to look at it. I mean, if there are more restrictions and we're told, oh, okay, now you can't leave your home state, without quarantining in a new state, for 10 days, people may not want to travel and therefore, they'll save money. And if you're told, oh, well, it's bad to dine in a restaurant again, it's not that safe, then sure, we'll save money. I mean, do we want that to happen? No. Ultimately, we want life to get back to normal. I think generally speaking, you're going to see two ends of the spectrum, right? There are a lot of people whose finances actually improved during the pandemic because they never lost income, and they also were really, kind of limited in what they could spend, so they saved money. Of course, you have people on the opposite end where they lost their jobs, their unemployment checks weren't enough to cover their old wages, or maybe they incurred added expenses during the pandemic due to things like school closures or remote learning. I think, generally speaking, it's a good idea to have at least 6 months worth of emergency savings on hand. By 6 months worth, I mean enough money to pay 6 months of essential bills. So, your rent, your cell phone, your car payment, things like that. I think that's always a good idea. I think right now also, Jeff, it might be a good idea. People are still kind of in that mode of like, oh, it's summer and, things are a little bit worse with regard to the outbreak, but maybe they're not as bad as they could get. I'm still going to go out. I'm still going to vacation, this, that. But I would just caution those people, if they're people who don't have a solid emergency fund, I would just caution those people, we don't know what the fall is going to bring about. We don't know what's going to happen once the weather cools and people are packed more in indoor spaces. We don't know if there are going to be widespread outbreaks in school now that this Delta variant has taken over and it's far more transmissible. So we don't know if schools are going to, go back to being remote. And that's a concern of mine, Jeff, because we've talked about it on the show before. I have 3 school-aged children. I rely on school for childcare during the day so that I could do my job. For the past year, I've had my children learning remotely at home, and while we've managed, it's been a challenge.
Yeah.
And there have definitely been periods where my income has taken a hit because I haven't been able to work all day because I've had to step in and help out with technical issues when, my kids', school meeting glitches out or whatnot. So, just on my end, thankfully I do have a fully loaded emergency fund. So, I'll be honest in that I'm personally not so inclined to scrap my August vacation and whatnot because I know that I've saved for this possibility. But I will just say, we really, things were really looking so good with the pandemic, earlier on in the summer. And right now they're just, not to be a downer, but they're just really not. Things are really uncertain right now. So from a financial standpoint, I think now's really that last opportunity. If you're not doing all that well on emergency savings, maybe rethink some of your plans in the next, in the next few weeks. Gear up for some more upheaval. I think unfortunately we're going to be in this situation for a while. So I think there's not that much we can do. Or I shouldn't say there's not that much, but there's only so much we can do to protect our health in this situation. There are steps we can take, right? We can go out and get vaccinated. We can put on a mask when we're at a supermarket. We can try to stay away from, crowded places when case numbers go up. Those are steps we can take, and that's about it. But to an extent, we have to live our lives, right? I have to send my children to school, which I know is a risk because they're too young to get vaccinated, but they have to learn. So that's something I have to do. And I have to enter a grocery store because I have to feed my family. That's not negotiable. So, on the other hand, when we look at the financial aspect, okay, maybe we are a little bit more empowered here. Maybe we can say, all right, well, I do have a lot of choices. I can opt to not do this and not do that if it means really building myself a solid financial cushion.
Yeah.
So that's the one message I think I would leave people. Just, be honest with yourself about the state of your finances and do what you need to do to protect yourself in light of the fact that this fall may very well mimic last fall. This winter may very well mimic last winter. Nobody wants to hear that, but that's just the reality.
Yeah, well, I think buckle up. We're going to be on a roller coaster ride, and I think well put, Mari. Mari, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. I want to wish you a great rest of the weekend. Have a great next couple of weeks, and we'll talk to you again at some point very soon.
That sounds great, Jeff.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Welcome back. Now, time to talk about the regulatory, legislative, and litigation landscape. Joining us on the line, he is one half of the very famous Legal Eagles. I'm talking to Kevin Walsh, a principal with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us today, even if we are sans one eagle.
Yeah, Jeff, it's always good being on, and sometimes an eagle goes missing.
We're sending out signals and flares. If anyone can if anyone can locate the other eagle, please do drop us a line at jeff@broadcastretirementnetwork.com. All right, Kevin, let's talk about
So Jeff,
missing
Jeff,
parts.
should we go through our policies and procedures to try to locate the other legal eagle,
That
or do you think we just pivot to chatting about whatever this week's topic might be?
Yeah, well, I think we should talk about policies and procedures. My personal opinion, policies and procedures around missing participants. I know this is a passion project of yours. This is really important for plan sponsors out there, whether you're in a pension or a defined contribution plan or have participants in a DC plan, to really be thinking about how do you find those people who have balances.
Well, I mean, I think it's a real challenge because the retirement system really only works if the folks get the benefits that they work so hard for. And it's been a focal point for retirees. It's been a focal point for employers, and it's been a focal point if you've been listening to this program for the last few years. That it's a focal point of the Labor Department, which is, are employers doing enough to try to make sure that these folks who left whatever the company is, some time ago and may have moved about the country, the Carmen Sandiegos of the world, the David Levines of the world, that when they go missing, are you taking sufficient steps to find them? So in reality, what's going on or has been going on is the Labor Department has done a number of investigations, and these can be painful and long. They've also now released essentially like a fact sheet that provides recommendations for what employers can do to locate participants.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a mixed bag. When they come in, I think the Labor Department's always, I feel like they're like a scolding parent in some way, where they're very disappointed and surprised that a plan would have anybody missing. And I don't think that's realistic. But they come in and they make some points, which are, are you trying to keep your census files up to date? If you get mail returned, are you taking steps to look for people who have mail returned? Most plans, they take steps to get deceased participants off their payroll. If you're cutting a check every month to somebody, plans tend to do periodic checks to figure out if the people they're cutting checks to really are alive. And the Labor Department can become concerned at times if you're, checking to see if people should be taken off of your payroll or
Mm-hmm.
off of your benefit stream. More often than you're searching to see if you can find those folks who you owe money to, but you just can't find. I think that there has to be an obligation on the part of people who are owed money to say, I'd like to get my money. But you can understand where the Labor Department is coming from, saying that, if you owe somebody money, you should take some reasonable steps and periodically, update, see if they're working, and periodically repeat the steps you're doing to look for folks. On the other hand, DOL also has some outlandish requests that they're encouraging employers to do, which really cut into, creepy, or they just seem kind of expensive in light of the expected return.
Yeah, Kevin. If you don't mind, I just want to, you and David also really focus on cybersecurity and privacy, and we've talked about that balancing act. You used the word creepy, but it's a balancing act in collecting information, right? And how you use that information. You can scour the web, the internet. You can use virtual services to do that. But you're right. I think one, how do you balance that? And two, I would just say I agree with you. I think that it's incumbent upon the employer, but also the employee, the former employee, to make sure that he or she that they have their information updated.
Yeah. In some of these, so the Labor Department, they encourage employers, to check out the former employees' social media accounts, and that one, I understand that could be effective. On the other hand, if we talk privacy, there could be some concerns. I know I'd be concerned if please don't go check my social media profile after I said that.
No, we're not.
I know folks could be concerned about, their employer saying, not only do I want to check out your social media profile, but now I'm being told by the government I ought to be checking everybody's social media profile. Similarly, the Labor Department's encouraged, if you have coworkers who you used to work with, ask those coworkers if they know where you live. And I joke about this, but if I left Groom and one of my former colleagues told me that David Levine was asking around if anybody knew where I lived, I'd be a little concerned that why is Mr. Levine trying to find me now all of a sudden?
Yeah, really good.
So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, it definitely is. Kevin, last question here. Obviously, you and David are in a lot of committee meetings, a lot of client meetings. Where does this, those meetings are filled with plan amendments, talking about plan amendments, talking about plan documents, talking about investments, fees, litigation. Where does the missing participant conversation end up in terms of the priorities of plan sponsors?
So I think plan sponsors are really focused on trying to pay benefits to people who are due, but they're also aware of the headache, hassle, and whatever you may want to call it, of a long DOL investigation. So the discussions that we've seen are, where there's companies that self-record keep, there's some questioning about whether it's worth it, because a lot of these services, in terms of the steps to look for folks, some of the larger record keepers essentially provide a suite of services where they'll do some of the things the Labor Department wants done and take it off the plan sponsor's plate. But so it's for those who are self-record keeping, it's continuing to balance, is it still worth it? And then if you are not self-record keeping, it's working with your record keeper, it's working with other service providers, not just to have a good process in place, but to try to document it so that if the Labor Department comes in, you can say, look, here's what we're doing.
Yeah. I don't think this is. I think at the beginning, it's a very vanilla conversation. But look, you're dealing with people's money. If you're a person and you leave, and look, people are moving around, Kevin. They are moving. Whether you're younger or mature, people have multiple jobs. You've got to keep track of where your money is, because if not, you're going to be trying to locate it. Who wants to locate it 50 years later or 30 years later after you finish a career? Oh, yeah, I work for XYZ company as administrative assistant, but I was earning money. I put money in a 401k. What happened to it? So, I think what sounds like initially a vanilla topic really is an important topic for people to think about.
Yeah, no, I agree, Jeff. And the pandemic and the move to mobile workforce is something that could exacerbate this going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kevin Walsh, one half of the famous Legal Eagles, really thank you so much for jumping on the show this morning. Give our best to David Levine. We look forward to chatting with you and David again very soon. Have a great rest of the weekend.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, listeners. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Welcome back, and now time to talk tech, consumer goods, streaming, you name it, we covered in this segment. Joining us on the line, he is lead advisor, executive producer for 7 Investing. We're talking to Daniel Klein. Dan, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me. I am, as rarely is the case, I am at home in West Palm Beach for the day.
Well, good for you. I'm so glad that you're home, and I wanted to chat with you about streaming. I know you cover a lot with streaming on your own show, own network, and just in general, you're a big streamer, viewer. But I saw Roku numbers down slightly. I wanted to get your thoughts about that, and also what's going on with Black Widow. And I don't mean the spider.
My God, Roku numbers down slightly. Smash your TV, throw away your device, and all kids are all playing outside now. They're with other kids and talking. No, here's what happened. The world has opened up a little bit. Jeff, I don't know if you know this, but a year ago, we couldn't go out to dinner with friends. Now, obviously, there are some complications, but now, for the most part, you're allowed to do things you couldn't do. That's why numbers went down. At this point a year ago, we were all comparing notes on, what's the 17th most important series we want to watch on Netflix. And now, there's a lot more new programming. So for all the streaming we do, people are watching the Olympics. People do watch live sports. They do watch, ridiculous, American Ninja Warrior on NBC. I don't know what the programming is this summer, but there's definitely programming. So yeah, we're gonna stream a little bit less. And I don't take this as a weakness for Roku. Roku is always gonna be a little bit of an up and down business, simply because it's going to depend on what shows are on. It's going to depend on weather. It's going to depend what anyone is doing. Look, tonight's going to be a really big night for Roku. You can watch Suicide Squad for free if you're an HBO Max subscriber. I'll probably be doing that. So I don't worry about these numbers in the tiniest bit.
Yeah, and what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I think people are being a little bit more, look, they want to get out. But I think people are still going to use streaming services. I think they're going to be a little bit more judicious with their time, especially if they can go out. But I don't see streaming we're not going to revert back to everyone getting a cable box. And so if anyone is out there either who believes that or is concerned about that, I think that you can dispel that. That is not going to happen. We are not going back to cable boxes. The genie is not going back in the bottle. But people will be more judicious in terms of what they watch, and it's up to content providers like ourselves, you and I. We're content providers, but others, mainstream content providers like Netflix, to provide content that I think people want to enjoy. And so if they do, and they have a way to find it, their streaming is still going to continue to be successful.
Yeah, streaming is the default. Even people who have traditional cable boxes, my HOA provides cable, so I have cable. I don't think a day goes by where we don't watch something on streaming. And I think in a lot of cases, people are going to move to digital cable subscriptions, like a Sling or a YouTube or a Hulu Live, that are done through Roku boxes or through Apple devices or Amazon devices. Look, the only thing you could say about Roku that's a negative, and I heard this said, is that there's no appreciable difference between Amazon, Roku, and Apple, aside from price, with Apple being higher. And I think that's fair to say. I don't think Roku has done a ton to separate itself from Amazon. I own multiples of both devices, and I wouldn't say like, oh, wow, I'm going to buy that TV because it has Roku versus Amazon embedded. Now, I will say, if you gave me a choice of Roku versus Android, I'd pay $200 more to have Roku. Or if I had to buy the Android TV because it was cheaper, I would add a Roku device. So, but for the most part, for the major players, which really are Amazon and Roku, you could argue Roku's not that different, but I don't think that's going to matter. I think this is going to be a steadily growing company. How many hours people watch just isn't that important. Now, we never talked about that with television, and I understand that advertising is part of the Roku business, but they're also going to get smarter with advertising. They're going to get better at it. They're going to make more money per ad rather than necessarily having to increase how many ads are out there. So I think this is like sort of a false bear argument.
Dan, let's talk about Black Widow, which is a movie that was streamed simultaneously on Disney as it was released in the theater. What's the beef that Scarlett Johansson, or we'll call her ScarJo, even though she's never been on our show, she has an open invitation to come on, by the way. But what's the issue here about co-releasing on a streaming network or a box office? Is it all about money?
Yeah, so this is bad management by Bob Chapek. This is a big fault. I don't think this would have happened under Bob Iger. So the contract to make Black Widow for Scarlett Johansson, I don't know her that well, so I'm going to call her Scarlett Johansson.
Okay.
That contract was signed in 2017. Disney Plus wasn't announced yet. So when she signed that contract, which said it has to have a wide global box office release, she didn't think, well, what about this other streaming service that they might put it out on that'll take some of the box office? Now, that's reasonable. What Disney did in using its movies to, make some money, because the 60 million or so they made in the opening week on Disney Plus, they keep almost all of it, whereas the money in the theater, they keep somewhere between 60 and 70%, depending on the deal. And that number goes down the longer a film is in theaters. So Disney sort of did everything in good faith, except for the fact that they should have gone to Scarlett Johansson before the release and said, okay, here is the deal. You have these box office escalators in your contract. We are going to either buy those out and say, hey, here's $10 million and we'll just get rid of that, or we're going to give you bonuses based on how it performs digitally, but here's the problem. We're not going to share that information with you because we don't want it to be public, so you're going to have to trust us. And that has historically been a problem in the movie business. There's not a lot of trust there. Disney should have made sure we never heard about this issue, and instead what they did, and this is a tactical mistake, is they came out and said, hey, she's already made 20 million. And I know that a lot of average people, who aren't making 20 million, and Jeff, I'm not making 20 million, are going to go, hey, she made 20 million for the movie. She should just shut up and be happy. But here's the reality. Do we get mad when an athlete who has a bonus clause, for making the All-Star team takes the bonus, even if they had a big salary? Look, there's not a ton of movies out there for Scarlett Johansson that are going to offer this type of payday. So the reality is you have to make your money where you're going to make your money. And she's been in multiple billion-dollar movies for Disney, and Black Widow's not going to be that. But Black Widow, if it drives 1 million people to sign up for Disney Plus, that right there is, a significant driver. That's $80 million a quarter. So, or not a quarter, a month. So it's a significant driver. The old metrics of box office don't matter anymore. So, in the old days, you go, yep, the film did this much, and nobody would ever factor in marketing cost or the theater's cut or whatever it is. They're just like, wow, it made this much at the box office. And then the movie company would be like, yeah, it didn't make any money. Now it's gotten even more complicated because, like, how do you value a person who kept Disney Plus because Black Widow was coming out and they could pay $30 extra to watch it? Or what about the person who keeps Disney Plus because they're going to wait until it's for free on Disney Plus? So all the money becomes murky. Disney never should have let this go public. It makes them look really bad.
Yeah, it looks pretty petty, but 340, this is on Box Office Mojo by IMDb, almost $350 million made worldwide, and it's split basically 50-50. Dan, I would think that, and again, I'm not worried about Scarlett Johansson making money. She's made a lot of money. It really, as you said, it really just doesn't wash with, I think, most people. You can't relate to this. But do you think that negotiations for others, there's some lessons to be learned from contracting lawyers for these artists? I'll call them artists. Some of them are artists. Some of them, I would argue, they're not really good artists. But anyway, what does this change in terms of the contractual relationships? And could this drive, if they're getting more of the nut, then could this drive up streaming costs?
Yeah, so here's the situation. Netflix tends to pay a flat fee. So if you're, Ryan Reynolds or The Rock or someone who has a lot of negotiating power, or even Adam Sandler or Sandra Bullock, when you make a Netflix movie, you're not doing it on a bonus basis. And they're using their algorithm to say, okay, if we create this movie, here's what it's going to do for us. Here's what it's worth. It's why they're very comfortable giving Adam Sandler money to make movies that I don't know a person who's ever watched one of them, but they obviously do well within that system. And if you're a star, if you're Sandra Bullock, and you can make Bird Box, which everyone is going to say is a hit because so many people watched it, but it doesn't have the box office dollar pressure. Look, it's a lot easier to watch something that's free on Netflix. Like I watched the Will Smith movie Bright, which is incomprehensibly bad, but I don't feel bad about watching it. It was kind of entertaining because it was so bad because I watch it on Netflix. If I'd paid, $11.50 a ticket and $6 for popcorn and $5 for water at the movie theater, I probably would have been pretty upset. So I think if you're a star, you might consider, hey, Netflix is offering me $12 million to make this movie, but it's kind of a free pass. Like there's no judgment. It doesn't dim my box office star to take this money. And I think a lot of stars are very smartly doing that. Your Mark Wahlbergs of the world, who are not surefire box office hits, have really found a home with these movies. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that. It's going to drive down the payday. You're not going to see, as many stars getting these deals that pay them $10 million up front, and a raw cut of the box office, and they make $50 million. But there are only a handful of stars getting that, and only for very, very select movies. So I do think you're seeing changing economics, and it's moving much more to a TV model where you're just getting paid to do what you do, and the performance is not overly relevant.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see how it all kind of shakes out. Ultimately, it comes down to the bottom line and who's going to get part of what. But I guess we'll have to wait and see because we both cannot predict the future. Dan Klein, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. Great talking about streaming. And look, we bring a little bit of Hollywood, and I want to just reaffirm that Scarlett Johansson can come on our program any day. We'd like to talk retirement savings and a lot more. Dan Klein, take care of yourself. Have a great rest of the weekend. We'll talk to you again very soon.
We'll see you next week.
See you, buddy. Bye-bye. Welcome back. Now we're going to talk real estate. Joining us on the line, Jacob Passy is a real estate reporter and a lot more for Market Watch. Jacob, thanks so much for joining us again this morning.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's always great talking to you about a number of issues. And I know last week we chatted about the end of the eviction moratorium, which I think had a lot of people concerned for obvious reasons. The ability to be evicted was really concerning for people who might lose their homes, not be able to find another home at a reasonable price. But I think you've got some new news that transpired this week.
Yes. So the Biden administration, whether they threw a lifeline to to folks, whether you want to say it was them bowing to pressure or not. They essentially issued a new moratorium, although functionally it really was just an extension of the previous one with some new requirements, that tenants have to meet or expect to be able to qualify. So yeah, they announced it on Tuesday, late in the day, and basically it's similar to how the moratorium worked before. It's not automatic. Tenants have to, sign a declaration form that they provide to their landlord to be protected by it. But the new requirement is that it only applies to folks who live in parts of the country that are seeing high transmission of the virus that causes COVID-19. That data is tracked by the CDC, and there is a map on the CDC's website that folks can refer to determine whether or not they qualify. But that's kind of a new requirement that folks need to meet. And when I spoke with consumer advocates this week, there were a lot of concerns raised about that new requirement and, whether or not this, extended or new moratorium, however you want to call it, will end up protecting folks that need the protection.
Yeah, it's this new wrinkle, obviously throwing people for a loop. Jacob, I have read some stories on your I don't know, blog is the right word, on your site about I think landlords they did sue. I think they launched a volley saying, "Hey, look, we need to get paid and we need to kind of move things forward." And any news there, any developments there? I think they sued the Biden administration and the CDC, or maybe they sued the CDC and not the Biden administration. Who knows?
Well, they're kind of, the CDC is a federal agency, so it kind of falls under the general umbrella of the Biden administration. So suing one is the same as suing the other, although they may have, I don't know how the suits were written, who was party to them per se. But you're right. There were a number of legal challenges to the previous moratorium that went through the pipeline. And they went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ended up not taking the case. But the reason they didn't take the case was because they said that the moratorium was set to expire at the end of July. And they basically said, we're going to let it run its course. And, the justices on the conservative side of the court hinted that, otherwise they probably would have struck it down as unconstitutional. But they said, enough of them basically said, we're going to let it run its course because it's already about to end. This will give more time for folks to get, emergency rental assistance, and that'll be that. But now there's a new moratorium or an extended moratorium, however you want to refer to it. So, already there's one federal judge who had ruled against the CDC previously, who has said that she will take up a case from a group of realtors, including the Alabama Association of Realtors, who are challenging the, moratorium in court again. The Biden administration, to their credit, they saw this coming. That was one of the reasons they weren't originally going to extend the moratorium, is because they said it wouldn't pass muster in court. In comments that he made on Tuesday, Biden kind of hinted at that. And I think there's this general thought out there that this moratorium probably won't end up surviving, legal challenges. But, it's not like court rules and then overnight everything has changed. Things are typically stayed, and, oftentimes judges will, not allow a decision to take hold until it gets through appeal, et cetera. So that all takes time. And really what the Biden administration is trying to do with this moratorium is give renters and landlords more time to get emergency rental assistance. There was about $46 billion of assistance that was approved by Congress earlier this year, but most of that money still has not made its way to renters and landlords. And that's for, a range of different reasons, bureaucratic challenges. There's not been, in some parts of the country, there's been overabundant interest, and the housing authorities in certain cities were flooded with applications and didn't have enough people to process all of them. Whereas in other parts of the country, landlords either weren't interested or weren't aware that they could get assistance, or renters for that matter. So a lot of that money still hasn't been spent, but that's money that could keep people in their homes. So what the Biden administration is really trying to do is just give themselves even more of a buffer to protect people and get them that money that they are owed. It just remains to be seen, though, how this will all play out. Even if things don't, immediately get struck down in the highest courts of the country, one big concern that consumer advocates have is that with any eviction, it's decided by a judge. Mm-hmm. It's a legal process, and the way it may shake out for a particular renter could just depend on that judge's feelings on the matter. A judge could easily point to the writing from the Supreme Court previously saying that, they would have struck down the moratorium had it not been set to already expire. A judge could point to that and say, the highest court in the country has already kind of hinted that this isn't constitutional, so I'm not going to let you skip, I'm going to approve the eviction. I'm not going to cut you some slack here. They could say that to the tenant. On the flip side, maybe if they are, more lenient, they will do so. So it just depends on, very much on what a judge is going to decide. And that's, and the challenge here is that most renters, when they go to eviction proceeding, don't have legal representation. Mm-hmm.
It's expensive.
It's expensive.
Yeah, it's very expensive.
Or they don't know how to avail themselves of legal aid. And, because there are legal aid societies all across the country that will provide pro bono representatives for, folks facing eviction. And there isn't a right to counsel in most states. There's only 3 states and a handful of cities across the country that guarantee a right to counsel for civil proceedings like an eviction case. So, because of all that, renters don't necessarily have a legal, representative in most cases that will say, to the judge, well, hey, hold on. It doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says because they didn't actually rule yet. And, this is what the order is from the CDC or this and that. So, it's tough to say how many people will ultimately be protected. Hopefully for renters, they can get just, as quickly as possible, get the emergency rental assistance they are owed and get right-cited. Also remember that, if you're a renter and you're listening to this and having trouble, negotiate with your landlord. Landlords, it is expensive to evict someone for a landlord too, because they have to hire a lawyer usually. And it's not like they just get a new tenant overnight. So, if you are in this position, you can negotiate with your landlord, try to get a payment plan in place, and figure out a way to make things feasible for you moving forward.
Yeah, I think you made some I think people, to protect themselves or at least prevent possible strain, anxiety, should try to do as much research as possible. I would imagine, Jacob, that the state websites would have additional information on the process, the resources available to people who may not be able to hire an attorney, and also how to go about getting some type of funding support to prevent an eviction.
Yeah. No, I think, there will definitely, different states or it could be your city, and that is an issue in some parts of the country is, like somewhere like Atlanta, it's not always clear exactly which authority, is there at your disposal, whether it's a state authority, a county authority, a city authority. It can get complicated, but research, you go to your local housing administration website, and they will have, they should have links to all those details. And then, also be sure to check the CDC's map. It's available on their website to see what the COVID transmission rate is for your county. If it's shaded in red or orange, you will qualify still for the moratorium. If it's not shaded red or orange, I don't believe you will, at least at this time. And it can change. That was the one thing they said is, obviously it's a moving situation. So even if your county doesn't qualify now, it could qualify in a few weeks' time. So if you're a renter, it's important to keep abreast of, what the transmission rate is in your area to see if you are protected.
What a mess. It's just a mess. Jacob, that's just my personal opinion, not yours. Jacob, we're going to have to leave it there. I don't speak for anyone but myself, of course. We're going to have to leave it there. Jacob, always a pleasure chatting with you. Great update. And I guess we're going to see how this all plays out over the next few weeks as this variant runs its course. Have a great rest of the weekend. Stay safe. We'll talk to you again soon, my friend.
Talk soon. Take care.
Bye. And that wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday. Have a topic of interest? Someone you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow, this time for BRN AM. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.